Hello and welcome. My name's Samantha Zupin. I'm Vice President of Corporate Communications at Glassdoor. And joining me today is Glassdoor Chief Economist, Dr. Andrew Chamberlain. Andrew, thank you. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are here today to talk about hiring predictions for 2019. But of course, before we dig into what's ahead, it's a great time of year to also look back at what happened in 2018. So if you are a recruiter, a talent acquisition pro, a hiring manager, this is a session for you to make sense of what happened this past year and also make sure you can have a clear understanding of what's going to come up in 2019 to make sure that your hiring plans are as robust as possible. So Andrew, let's dig in.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so there was countless amount of news events and developments impacting the world of work this year and how we all hire. So how did you even come about picking the top 5 things that actually happened in 2018 to make this report of yours?
There were so many things to choose from. 2018, a huge year for hiring and a super strong economy. What this report is, this is like a 30,000-foot view of the labor market and the hiring world, the big picture trends that we think everybody should be smart about. What happened this year and what's coming for 2019. So what's special about Glassdoor is we really have this unique window into this. We've got millions of job seekers leaving reviews and salaries telling us the trends that are happening today. And also we see hiring. We've got all the jobs in America today on Glassdoor. So that puts us in this really unique position. We can use the data that we've got at Glassdoor along with our labor market experts on our research team. So these are like the 10 big stories we really wanted to share with the hiring world.
Fantastic. Well, as we go through this today, if you have questions about what Andrew's going to be sharing about what happened in 2018 and what's coming up for 2019, please use the hashtag GDChat. And we will try to tackle as many of those through this session, or of course after this session, as this session will live on. We happen to be here live at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center in San Francisco. And so, of course, as we're thinking about what's been happening all around us in the world and at the world of work, help us kind of understand what was going on for job seekers and employers, right? Was it a good year for job seekers or was it a bad year? Was it a good year for employers or was it a bad year?
Well, no question, 2018 was a great year if you were a job seeker. You've got a 50-year low unemployment rate. You've got 7 million unfilled jobs. My opinion is this is the best labor market that we have had in America in a whole generation. So if you're a job seeker today, this puts you in the driver's seat. So it's a great time to be negotiating for pay, making sure employers offer the benefits that you need, and getting yourself into a job that really fits your life. On the other hand, if you're an employer, anybody watching this who tries to hire knows 2018 was a real struggle. There are today more open jobs sitting unfilled than there are unemployed workers in the US. And so that's like leading to a real scarcity of candidates, especially for tech, knowledge worker jobs. Companies know workers really have their choice of where to go, and I think they're really struggling to differentiate themselves. In 2018, employers really saw the value of having a great employer brand to help them stand out from the crowd and help attract that top talent this year.
Interesting. I mean, as a hiring manager, I know I've definitely felt it as we've been trying to get people in the door. So
as have I.
Yeah, yes. So, okay, so as we're kind of laying into this first trend that we have here, right? One of the big things I feel like that we keep hearing about is robots, robots, robots. I mean, probably next year when we do this, it will be a robot sitting here. So talk to us about that. I mean, are the robots coming to take all our jobs? Like, what are you seeing?
The robots are probably not coming to take your job,
all right,
and they're probably not coming to take most jobs. So one of the things we saw in 2018, when you look at how companies are actually using artificial intelligence, they're typically not using it to totally replace a worker. They're using it to team up. AI is turning into a worker's ally. So artificial intelligence tools are things like a chat bot on a bank website, or a tool that helps an advertising exec automatically target audiences, or maybe an email meeting scheduler, an AI bot that takes care of your meetings. None of those things are a complete job. Those are like a routine part of a larger, more complicated job. So the reality in 2018, when we looked across job postings and we saw who was hiring people for AI-related roles and how are they using these tools, it doesn't look like mostly it's going to lead to lots of layoffs. And so people who are doing hiring should not assume that just because you're using more AI means you're going to have many, many fewer employees. Instead, it means more of your employees are going to team up with tech and potentially be able to do more as automation frees them up to be more creative, be more human, do potentially more valuable things.
Yeah, so you kind of really see this as more of an ally for the recruiter and the hiring manager in particular, like helping make the job much, much easier.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And that really became clear in 2018.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you really take this into account, because I think with the whole AI scene out there, it just sounds terrifying and unapproachable. And so you're basically just saying, don't be afraid of it. It's really kind of take the time to kind of learn about it and see how you can leverage it for your day-to-day.
That's exactly what we see.
Interesting. Well, I mean, one of the great things, right, about robots, unless they get coded otherwise, is that they really don't, hopefully, have this gender bias built in, which I think also leads us to the second trend that you're seeing is a gender-related trend of 2018.
Yes, that's right. So 2018 was dubbed a year of the woman.
Yeah.
And this was not only in politics, but also in business. So in the midterm congressional elections, you saw more than 100 women joining the House of Representatives, breaking the all-time record for female representation. But then also in the business world, California in 2018 became the first state to require female representation on corporate boards. And as a result, you're seeing more companies getting ahead of this. One of the landmark events this year, the New York Stock Exchange CEO was taken over by Stacey Cunningham, first female CEO in 220-year history of the NYSE, highly symbolic. But there were many other examples that we highlight in our full study of women taking more C-suite leadership positions and really making waves in 2018, both in politics and in business. Now, in my opinion, there's a business case for this. The research is really clear that if you have more diversity on boards and more gender and ethnic diversity on teams, you get more innovation, you get better performance. I think that companies are starting to realize that, and that's we definitely expect that to continue in 2019 and beyond.
I mean, that's great. I mean, and hopefully we'll also get to the point where diversity is not such a novelty thing that we're having to talk about, and it will just be such the norm of what we're actually used to in the workplace.
The dream goal of diversity and inclusion is to have it no longer be an issue, just have it be part of the normal process of business. So we're slowly getting there, slowly but surely.
Slowly but surely. So another big thing that we really, I mean, I don't think anybody could really escape from this news item this year was really the sensitivity around your own data, right? As consumers, this was in headlines all over the place. And so you're not only pointing out that consumer data was a big trend of 2018, but also the data that we have with our own employers. Talk to us a little bit about what that is, what employers have on us.
A lot.
And also just as an employer, what's our kind of responsibility and how do we think about that?
Yeah, there were big data breaches in 2018 that made news, and they were all consumer data breaches. But one trend that I think very few people are talking about today is how much data employers have on their employees. So where does this data come from? It's not just payrolls and social security numbers. It's things like biometric data, tracking movements of employees, webcams and apps that track online activity while you're at work, pulse surveys, all sorts of performance data. Companies today have much, much richer, detailed, super valuable information on their employees than ever before. And while that's great because it helps them do people analytics, there's also some risks, right? There's ethical questions about how is that data being stored, how is it being used. There's very little regulation. It's kind of the Wild West right now. And so in 2018, I think that's one of the things we saw is like so many more companies are collecting fitness tracker data and just like all kinds of rich personal information on employees. I think that employees are going to start asking employers, how are you using my data? Are you sure it's being stored safely? Because it's potentially just as valuable and sensitive as health data.
Got it. So your advice really for like kind of the employee perspective is don't be afraid to ask questions. Make sure that you can say, hey, what kind of data do you have on me? How is it being used? And go from there. For the employer, do you think then that there's also just probably an increased responsibility on them to also be upfront about this? I mean, do you see that will be a trend too, that employers will be more upfront? I
think employers already are trying to do their best to be transparent about what data they're collecting and to store it safely. But I don't think there's been much of a public disclosure, frankly, of what companies are collecting and how it's being used. And I think if employees don't ask, it won't ever really come up. And so I think that's likely to, these conversations are going to become more likely in the future as people become more aware of these consumer data breaches. If there's any high profile employee data breaches, such as like the Office of Personal Management in the federal government had a data breach several years ago. That made tons of headlines, but there hasn't been really any other private sector breaches. If that happens, this will become a big issue.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, and I think we know that on Glassdoor, we always see a certain level of insight on with the website that helps us understand how responsible employers are being. So that's always a good indicator too.
Absolutely. People will talk about it.
People will talk about it. That's right. Okay. So going to our fourth trend, now we're actually talking about a type of work, right? And so this is the gig economy, which is really about like the flexible work arrangements. I also read an article where you were quoted this week in Business Insider talking about Gen Z, and I have to imagine that Gen Z workers really would enjoy this kind of flexible working arrangement. So with indications that this, up and coming workforce is kind of more coming into the state today, it feels like gig economy would be here to stay and growing, but it sounds maybe not the case.
The lesson from 2018 is that the gig economy, although it has transformed things like ride sharing and room sharing and some services, it's way smaller than most people thought. The first official data came out on the gig economy from the Bureau of Labor Statistics this year, and it was about 1% of the US labor force. So about 1.6 million workers working in the gig economy.
Got it.
So it's a really tiny share, and it really isn't growing as fast as many people thought. Most of the low-hanging fruit for gig style work have already been picked. Basically, the only kind of jobs that really work for the gig economy, here's a good rule of thumb, is does the job require zero onboarding? Like, can the person be ready to go on day one? If so, that can probably work really well on a gig platform. So if you need a graphic designer to quickly lay out a report, great. Or if you need a ride across town, or you need someone to come build a fence at your house, great. But jobs like software engineer, health professionals, consultants that require deep institutional knowledge and relationships, those are never going to happen in the gig economy. So I think that's one of the big lessons this year is, like, even though Gen Z workers want more flexibility, it's probably not going to happen through gig platforms. They're going to demand flexibility within the confines of traditional full-time employment.
Interesting. So macro trend is basically, it's here to stay, but it's not growing rapidly. Takeaway for employers, if they're thinking about kind of recruiting too, leveraging that insight, is to really think about what their hiring needs are, and also the story that they're telling candidates, because maybe they don't need to over-index so much, perhaps, for that kind of workforce if it's not growing that rapidly.
That's good advice.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's round out the top 5 here. I think this is one also that we could not escape from reading this year, which was really about Amazon. I mean, they show up on my doorstep a lot, but this was really about their HQ2.
Yes.
Just help us again reframe what happened here, what your takeaway is, and why did this make your trend? I mean, it's a one company, but obviously it had some kind of bigger impacts.
It does have a bigger lesson for hiring and location. So Amazon's HQ2, highly anticipated announcement. It turned out to be more of an HQ3 because they chose locations in New York and in Washington, D.C. or Northern Virginia. So the reason this made our list is because it shows the importance of local talent for where you locate your business. You cannot assume, as you choose your business location, that you'll be able to get lots of workers to pick up and move for you. The reality is, when you look at the research that we've done at Glassdoor, 70% or more of applications that happen, people apply to jobs in their same metro area. Hardly anyone is ever willing to pick up and move for jobs. So for employers, like, you have to really go to where the talent already is. So that is the basic reason why Amazon ended up in New York and Northern Virginia, where there's already tons of talent, tons of tech employees, nearby universities feeding them talent, but also amenities that tech workers want, like walkable neighborhoods, pedestrian bike-friendly areas, dense housing, so that they can actually afford to have a home, rail transportation. All of those things are the amenities that workers want. So that's why that you didn't see them end up in one of the smaller, more scrappy metro areas that many people kind of wanted to see.
Yeah, many cities, I'm sure, are quite disappointed that it did not come their way.
Many cities disappointed, but for the people who really pay attention to how businesses choose to locate and what makes them go, it's no surprise. Another example of this was Apple recently announcing a huge billion-dollar investment. Where? Austin, which Austin is already a growing tech hub. There's the big universities there and many other tech employers to draw on. And also Google made an announcement of another investment in New York City. So this is becoming clear that the local talent that is in an area, it becomes the future of the DNA of your company. Because the reality is, when you start hiring in a local area, most of the applicants are going to come from nearby. So you better choose strategically where you locate, because that's where your applicants will come from.
Interesting. I mean, I'm imagining too, if you are a small or mid-sized employer and you're hearing about these big companies kind of expanding even more, it's kind of a terrifying concept. I mean, do you have any kind of more advice for thinking about these small employers about how do they keep their edge, or how do you think about it?
Well, if you're a small, medium-sized employer in, say, New York or Washington, D.C., I believe it's actually very positive when you have these big, highly visible employers come to town, because it does draw more attention to that labor market. It probably ends up growing the pie of talent more than it takes away from you. Because there will always be people who leave big established companies when they're ready for a change, and they move to smaller startups to tell their next story. That's how small, medium-sized companies will benefit, even when the big guys like Amazon come to town.
Got it. So basically, have openness and give it a little time. The people will come.
Give it some time. Go to those happy hours.
Okay, sure.
Go meet those new employees.
All right. Okay, so let's shift gears. So that was like an amazing year. I mean, we could probably then keep going down the list. I'm sure you probably have at least 20 more ideas of things that happened in 2018 alone.
2018, we're done.
Sure, okay, we're done. So we've moved on. So now let's go to 2019. So what are the things that we really need to be on the lookout for that are going to be happening and shaping how we think about 2019? So what's number one trend here?
Number one trend for 2019 is a new paradigm for job search. This has been long in the works, but I think now the data and the technology are ready to go. So here's what it is that the traditional view of job search used to be candidates look at many, many job postings, put hundreds, in some cases thousands, apply to a few, wait to hear back. That really hasn't changed for 50 years. It's gone online, but the basic setup is exactly the same. I believe the future of that will be more matching, more data-assisted matching of candidates with jobs. Because today's job boards are not just job boards anymore. They have rich reviews data on Glassdoor. We can see culture of companies. We see resumes. We see people's paths through their careers. We see their skills. So we're in a position to actually make really excellent, smaller sets of more curated job recommendations to people so that they're a better fit. So I believe this can really have a potentially very good effect for job seekers. It can really improve the candidate experience by taking the burden off them. So they don't have to look at thousands of job postings anymore. They can just look at a smaller set that the data tells them is a much better match. This also is potentially very good for recruiters. So instead of having to spend tons of resources to identify top candidates, we can make smaller sets of recommended jobs to people, and that will bring top talent straight to their door. And I believe that will impact retention and how good of a fit people are.
Got it. So it's really because of all this data and all this information sharing that we are inherently doing, and on the positive side of this, that we're basically going to end up with these more quality, kind of more informed candidates coming through our doors.
Yes, that's right. So that's the good news, is that there's potentially huge improvement coming in how we match candidates to jobs. The downside risks are important to take into account. This is not a free lunch, right? So the risks are...
Says the Economist, yes, sure.
I'm legally obligated to say free lunch at one point in every interview. So but the risks are if you're using data to make recommendations, there are ethical questions. There's a question about how transparent you need to be. How much do you have to disclose about how you're matching people up with jobs? And the data that you're using to do it, how safe is it? We'd already talked about data privacy and security. These issues are just going to get more important as platforms use more data to match up people with jobs.
Sure. All right, so let's pivot again. Let's talk about types of jobs that we're going to be seeing in 2019. So you told me that in 2018, or now probably going forward, that I don't need to worry that a robot will take my job. But I'm questioning, should I go back to school, become a software engineer, or a data scientist? I mean, because those have been highly in-demand jobs. It's like for several years now, it feels like. What are we going to see? What are we going to see? Who's going to be hot? Who's not?
Well, I mean, I think especially if you're young people getting in the labor market, tech is really where it's at. It's just riding this wave, and it's been happening for a decade. Everybody wants to work in technology, but a lot of people feel excluded because they are not software engineers and they're not data scientists. So what can they do to get on board, get a job in one of those big tech hubs at one of those big companies to get all those benefits and that premium pay? So one of the predictions we have for 2019 and beyond is that in the tech sector, the future of hiring is not technical roles as much. There always will be software engineers and data scientists, but the future are non-tech jobs. Because as companies grow, they have to monetize, and how do they turn their technology into revenue? They do it with sales associates, they do it with big sophisticated marketing teams They do it with operations people as they locate in new metro areas, finance people who keep the books in order, HR people who keep the benefits going.
Sure.
So all of these non-tech jobs.
Yeah.
So we've done research at Glassdoor where we looked at all the tech companies hiring in America today, and we classified how many of their jobs are tech and how many are non-tech. And we actually found like 40 to 45% of their job postings
Definitely
are
relieving
non-tech.
for us who have not gone on the tech traditional path. So this is great news. Thank you.
Great news for the liberal arts majors of the world.
Yes, keep going.
So
keep going.
I think that that's quite important.
Yeah.
So the reason I think this is really important for employers to know is that for tech, it potentially will change workplace culture. You're no longer just a group of engineers. You now have salespeople, you have different extroverted personalities joining in the team. So it totally will change the workplace dynamic at many of these companies. It's going to change the mix of benefits and pay that they have to offer. And it's going to change what industries compete with tech for talent, right?
Yep.
So, it's no longer just tech companies competing against other tech companies.
Sure.
Now it's like tech competing with professional services and consulting because they want to get their very best program managers. They want to get their salespeople. So it's leading to almost like a talent convergence between tech and non-tech sectors. Tech is becoming more traditional, and traditional, of course, are trying to become more like tech.
So throughout the year, I've actually noticed that a lot of companies that are not what you would consider traditional tech companies are really working to kind of position themselves as tech companies. I mean, are we going to see that change? Is this kind of a mistaken investment?
No, I think that this is definitely positive.
Okay.
So this is the reason many traditional companies are trying to position themselves as tech is because tech has had this huge advantage of using data to do more scientific management and experimentation. That has been the key to why the tech industry has grown and just been so fabulously successful. So other industries are seeing that and they're trying to replicate it. And then, so as a result, you get these funny examples where, like Domino's Pizza considers itself a tech company that makes pizza today. So that's like a dramatic shift in perspective. It changes like their whole strategy. It changes who they're hiring. So I think that that's definitely positive because it's being, there's more data than ever available. We're tracking more consumer behavior, more employee behavior. It's being stored, and we have really good machine learning models to turn it into knowledge today. The more industries figure that out and act more like tech,
you think it's going to be better?
It's definitely for the better.
Really interesting. So, so takeaways really are keep leaning into positioning yourself as a tech company. There's a lot of things that are really working about that, and study those companies that are doing it really well. I know L'Oreal is another example of this too, that's actually trying to position themselves as a tech company because of the talent they're trying to reach. And then it also sounds like, going back to your 2018 trends, that you should also, as an employer, be thinking about the skills that you're offering folks coming in, because obviously it's not just IQ, you've got EQ skills that are kind of coming as part of this investment in employees. And also just be open to all backgrounds of training and things like that.
The single best piece of advice we try to give people, like a non-tech, like traditional employer, say in banking or consulting, who's trying to hire tech roles and be seen more as a tech company. Best piece of advice we give people is hire based on skills rather than degrees. Like, don't just hire people who did computer science for their college major. You want to look at what people can actually do. And then on the other hand, for tech companies that are trying to fill out their sales force, like, they're going to have to build up the skills in their onboarding and their recruiting and hiring process to identify people with better EQ. It's a totally different recruiting landscape, hiring a software engineer versus hiring a sales leader. I mean, there's almost no overlap in how the search and interview and onboarding process goes.
I mean, I think that whole process of how you get somebody into a role and just thinking about the future of what they can bring, I mean, that's a whole other session right there, I'm sure, just on its own. So that's great.
We'll save that for the next
one. That's the next one. Okay. All right. So the other thing that you mentioned back in, here we are, 2018 was about women in leadership, which really is part of this kind of larger diversity and inclusion topic that is bubbling up left and right. Where do we go now with diversity and inclusion?
So this is our third prediction for 2019 and beyond, is I think belonging, this concept of belongingness at work really is the future of companies trying to get diversity and inclusion right.
Totally agree.
So the history of this is basically, in the early days, companies focused on diversity, which was like getting the numbers right in the workforce. And while that was great, it wasn't really self-sustaining, because often they would get the numbers right, but there were still big divisions in the workforce. Like, there would be all of one type of worker in the front line jobs and then all of another type in the executives. So the goal of inclusion was to try to make sure that underrepresented groups you were hiring were like placed on throughout the organization in all types of roles and put on management tracks, so they were like plugged into the organization.
Yep.
This new wave of thinking about belonging, though, is about letting people keep their identity as individuals at work, so that they feel safe to be creative and let their best selves out.
Yep.
What we want to avoid is having a homogeneous corporate culture where everybody coming in feels like they have to fit themselves into it and feel constrained and trapped, like they can't really be their true authentic selves.
Yep, 100%.
So today, that's one big move we see. There are several examples of companies who are really investing in creating a sense of belonging today.
Yeah.
A few good examples we've seen were 3M and Airbnb and Aetna. All three of them, if you look at their programs, they're really consciously investing in this idea of letting people bring their diverse lived experiences and backgrounds into the workplace and using that as a force to perform better.
Well, this is going to have a lot of interesting, I'm sure, economic analysis down the road, but it also feels like you're kind of saying that it's going to be the year of are people really walking the talk, right? It feels like a lot of companies said, yes, we're going to invest in diversity and inclusion, and you're kind of saying, unless people feel like they can fundamentally feel like they belong, like that's where the magic's going to happen.
Your diversity program is not going to be self-sustaining unless you have belonging, because people won't stay, and they won't try to work their way up the ranks, and they won't recruit through their peer networks. So that's really the key. I think an important point to make, though, is there's also a really strong business case for belonging, diversity, and inclusion. There's a well-known McKinsey study that looked at 1,000 companies all over the world, and what they found is that companies with more diverse teams, both gender and ethnic diversity, they outperformed a better financial performance, basically.
Well, that's not a bad thing.
And there's many other examples. You know, we
absolutely.
see this over and over again. Like having more diverse teams leads to better decision making in groups, and it definitely leads to more innovation. So I think big companies see that. They see they have a diversity problem in their workforce, but it also has a business case behind it. And I think 2019 and beyond is the year when we finally figure out belonging might be the piece that we need to fill in order to make that work.
All right, so let's take another let's step into the fourth trend here and what we have. And you bring light on another big impact that you think that we're going to feel in terms of like what's going to add a little bit of pressure here, it sounds like, to recruiting. It's age-related, which is fascinating. Talk to us about what this is, what's happening, and how do we prepare?
Yeah, so all of the trends we talk about in this report are big picture, but this one about demographics is like the biggest of the big picture.
Okay, all right.
So this is like the tidal wave that's coming. So today, there's a big lump of baby boomers, a big mountain of them that are moving toward retirement and are leaving the labor force. At the same time, the birth rate in the United States is at a 30-year low. And it's like the same story that you've seen throughout Western Europe and Japan. So putting these two things together, what this means is that the workforce in 2020 and beyond is going to be growing much more slowly. So in the 1970s, the workforce was really growing fast, or it was growing at like 2.5% a year. And in 2020, it's going to be growing at like less than 0.5% per year.
Oh my goodness, okay.
So many, many fewer workers to hire.
Yeah.
So at the same time, though, like business is not going to dry up. Like all these retiring baby boomers are retiring with tons of savings, and they're going to continue to consume healthcare, leisure, tourism, all of these other things. So business is going to be strong, but the workforce is dwindling. This is bad news if you're in a hiring position. This means you could potentially see labor shortages for decades. Like I think today's tight labor market is going to persist for potentially decades down the road.
Oh my goodness.
And it's really going to change how companies have to hire.
Your advice really here is for society to have more children. Like this was really the solve that you're trying to give us.
That's one way to.
It's fine.
That's one way to solve the problem.
Okay,
Unfortunately, there's not very much employers can do to support that.
No.
But what they can do, though,
yes.
they can make each hire count more. Okay, so there's a couple ways.
Okay.
So one way is you can use automation and AI technology to team up and make each worker do more. So we already talked about that. That is absolutely coming.
So multitasking on jet fuel. Okay.
If you can't hire as many people, but you still have the same amount of work to get done, what you have to use is some kind of automation or augmentation of workers to get it done. So like today, I don't think most companies are ready to do this because I think they don't have the training and development programs that are relevant and that are getting their workers ready to work alongside AI and automation. So many companies are trying to fill in the gaps on training today to improve this. Udemy, Coursera, Udacity, even YouTube. There's a lot of platforms with that are offering like micro learnings, video, small chunks of learning, like consumable bits to help people figure out, like, okay, here's how the chat bot works on the site, and here's how it augments my daily work as a customer service rep. Or here's how I use an AI ad targeting tool to automate like all of these audience ad targeting that I've been doing as a marketing manager, and that frees me up to like go do this other thing. So I think that's a really important trend we see coming in 2019 and beyond. Changes in the training and development programs at companies to get workers ready to team up with technology.
I mean, this is kind of like a mind-blowing session. This always happens when I talk to you. And when I think about this AI, machine learning, so you're basically saying like, you got to get on it if you're in this hiring role to try and like bring people in. You need to put your own recruiting on jet fuel so that you can bring people in. And then once you've got the people in, you need to apply all this AI to it so that they can do more, basically, while on the job. I mean, it's crazy.
There's just going to be a much smaller workforce in the future, but a growing and healthy economy hiring those people. So that's a recipe for a tight labor market, potentially for decades. And what this means for employers is like you can't assume you're going to be able to fill all the open jobs you have today. Like you need to figure out ways to hire smarter, make smarter hires, so that the few people that you do hire really are a great match. And then once you get them on board, find ways to let them team up with automation to do the jobs.
I mean, it feels like a big question if you are working with any company. It's just like, and trying to figure out how to bolster your recruiting is ask those companies that you're trying to get more technology support, how are you leveraging AI? How are you leveraging machine learning? Because I need to put my recruiting on jet fuel. So that's a big, big takeaway there for us.
That's right.
All right, so this next question, this next trend that you have is really like, I'm sure, predicting the next big earthquake here in California. Andrew, just answer it for us here. When is the next big recession happening?
No interview with an economist is complete unless someone asks me whether there's a recession coming. No one has the answer to that. There's an old joke that economists have predicted 11 of the last 10 recessions or something. So I'm not going to tell you whether a recession's coming. What I will say is I can tell you why people are worried today as we go into 2019. So although the economy is very strong and the job market is roaring, there are lots of clouds that are showing up on the horizon.
Here it comes.
Anybody who has a 401k has seen the stock market has been really volatile, basically flat over the last year. The Federal Reserve is raising up interest rates, and that means mortgages are getting more expensive, and that means that the housing market is starting to slow down a little bit, which is like, you know, people who remember the last recession.
This all feels very familiar.
It's very familiar. You also have trade fears. There's trade with China and tariffs causing lots of uncertainty. About 10 or 15% of the economy depends on trade. That's a pretty big chunk.
That's pretty big.
And so people are worried about that. And there's also this like kind of wonky idea of the yield curve.
Yes, what is this?
What is the yield curve?
What is the yield curve, Andrew? Break it down for us, please.
The quick explanation is the yield curve is a line that shows the relation between Treasury maturities and the interest rate on them. Normally it slopes up because longer term Treasuries like pay higher interest. If it turns upside down, it's bad news. That almost always predicts a recession. And today the Treasury yield curve is nice and flat, and there's one little part of it that is inverted this year. So a lot of people are looking at that and they're wondering, like, should we be getting ready? So those are all the things to worry about.
Okay, so there's three big signals to look out for. And so for those who were in the workforce when we did go through the past recession, which really doesn't feel like that long ago, what advice, again, do you have for employers as hiring changes in the recession, right? Like inherently hiring may have to drop down, but how do you just think about an overall recruiting approach? Like what's the best advice you can offer here from what you've seen from perhaps 10 years ago to today?
Well, during a recession, your hiring needs will go down. But what won't disappear is the need for a great employer brand. So building up a great employer brand and a reputation and a healthy workplace culture takes decades. And it's not something you want to stop investment in and let it fall apart just because your hiring needs slow down. Even during a recession, even though you're hiring fewer people, each person you do bring on board needs to be a great fit because you're those are additions into your company culture, one at a time, those few jobs that you're hiring. So that's really important. You still have to pay attention to matches.
Yeah.
One thing that will happen also is you're going to see many more candidates for each open job. So during the last recession,
so it'll start to look a little rosier for employers, perhaps?
You're going to have a lot bigger candidate pool to choose from, that's for sure. So during the last recession, something like the ratio of like total number of unemployed workers for each open job was something like 5 or 6 to 1. So like 5 or 6 unemployed workers competing for every open job. Today, that ratio is like totally flipped, like it's less than 1.
Wow.
So there's like actually more open jobs than unemployed people. But during a recession, you will see that. Candidate pools will get a lot bigger. So this comes back to one of our earlier predictions, which is about matching. Is like when you're faced with giant pools of candidates who are scrambling, desperately looking for work, any tools that help you sort through and get the highest quality matches for your roles, those are definitely going to be helpful. So be on the lookout for those.
Great. Okay. Well, Andrew, thank you. I always love digging into this report. It's a great annual report that you put together. So thank you so much for doing it. Thank you for taking the time out today.
Thank you.
So we're going to pivot over to some questions that you have. So again, we're using #GDChat. And before we get there, if you've registered for this event today, you'll be getting a summarized version of all these great trends that Andrew walked through of both what happened in 2018 and, of course, importantly, what's going to happen in 2019. And you can also visit glassdoor.com/research/studies to find the complete report. So let's see what we've got here on the hotlines, Andrew. So give me just a second here. Now it's active. Okay. All right. So here we go. Andrew, let's see. I'm a company that's located in a future Amazon HQ2 location. How should my business prepare for the impact it's going to have on my company's hiring efforts? So dig a little deeper into this one if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so we mentioned this briefly before. The downside of Amazon or any other big tech company showing up in your job market is there's going to be a lot more competition for tech roles and also for the non-tech roles that these tech companies hire, like sophisticated sales executives, product managers, and other roles. So that is a challenge. On the plus side, though, is that it also ends up bringing more interest to that local market. I know across the country today, after the HQ2 announcement, there's people all over the United States who are looking at New York, looking at Northern Virginia, and trying to decide, like, maybe they should make a move, and like, if that's where the tech investment is happening, maybe they should join in there. So it can actually bring in some more people to the talent pool. My opinion, generally, more employers in an area, it tends, although it means competition for talent, it tends to grow the pie more than it hurts people. It's definitely, like anybody who's spent time in the big cities, you see that like more people, yeah, sure, it raises the cost of living and it leads to traffic congestion and some other downsides, but there's a reason everybody stays there. There's so much value from being close to other sophisticated, smart people. It drives innovation. Those coffee shop interactions in the cities become the next startups that happen. So I think it's definitely good news. I think they just need to plug in and draw on the new talent that it's bringing in.
That's great. All right. Shifting gears. So you mentioned labor shortages as workers age. Are there methods companies can use to keep older talent in the workforce longer to delay these potential shortages? That's a good question.
Well, this is not an easy question to answer. So, why do employees retire and leave? So it's often because they're looking for more flexibility. They want to start enjoying their retirement life, right? So one strategy that you can use to create spaces for older workers is more flexibility at work, work from home options, and more flexible schedules. A second way that you can help retain older workers is through training and development. I think a lot of workers sort of have vintages, like during your early part of your career, you learn your skills and your craft, and then that coasts and carries you through, and then you retire. But so often many people don't keep their skills fresh as they go through their career. So anything you can do to use training and development to help older workers plug into the latest technology so they don't feel as isolated. Making that investment back into employees definitely helps retain them.
So good for any age, basically.
It's good for any age. So my opinion is, people in some ways are like machines. Like our skills.
You're turning us into robots. Okay, it's fine. Yes.
Our skills need to be refreshed.
Yeah.
Just like you need to do maintenance on your car or any other machine,
Sure.
people's knowledge depreciates slowly over time too. Like you forget things and you get behind. So just like you invest a little bit in keeping your car maintained, you should be every year investing like 1% or 2% of your time or more in training. Just even though it may not be totally related to your job today, you should be putting in that 40 or 80 hours a year and picking up a new skill. Attorneys do it for a reason,
Sure.
doctors do it for a reason, CPAs do ongoing training for a reason. I think every job, whether it's blue collar, white collar, tech or non-tech, everyone in the future should be doing at least 40 to 80 hours of training a year.
Well, and it definitely sounds like this is an easy thing to track. So going back to that employer data, you can help make sure that people are leveraging these programs to learn what's working and what's not too. So that's great.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you should be able to see the outcomes. I think it will improve retention. It will improve productivity at work. It'll help keep those older workers on the payroll longer.
Oh, there you go. Love that. Okay. All right. So let's close out with one last question, because again, I think it's one that we're going to hear a lot about. And again, it goes back to this topic of AI. So my company, mid-sized company, how should we be leveraging AI to help employees be more productive? And I think also, let's just talk about it also from the recruitment side again too, because I think it's really important that we really think about the whole life cycle here of like, how can I as an employer be leveraging AI? How do I just brace this whole thing and broach this whole thing? And then also, once I've got my employees in, how do I think about it?
Yeah, well, there's really two ways that AI will affect employers. So some employers will be the ones that are like building AI and selling it.
Okay.
So this is the Googles of the world that are building AI products and selling. There's the consultants, some of the big consulting companies like Deloitte and others, they all offer companies guidance on how to use AI. So for those people, they're actually hiring like AI related roles. And it's not all deep learning engineers and software developers. Sure, there are those people for sure, but they are also hiring like business development people who work in AI or legal counsel that helps with the patenting and legal issues around AI. So we've done some research on Glassdoor looking at who is really hiring AI talent. It's a more diverse picture than you would think. It's not all data scientists and software engineers. There's actually
good news again. Great. Yes.
I mean, it's interesting that like the rollout of AI is actually creating lots of ancillary jobs as artificial intelligence is being turned into a product that you sell out in the marketplace. So those are those companies that are producing AI. But for most companies, you're not going to be doing that. You're not going to be making your own AI and selling it to the world. What you're going to be doing is using one of those AI products in a small way in your business to improve a small thing. So an automated meeting scheduler might be a tool that you use for your admin assistants so that they can focus on event planning or something else. Or one of these off-the-shelf AI products.
Got it. That's really interesting. So as I'm thinking, I'm putting myself in this role of the recruiter and the hiring manager, it almost sounds like start with this just assessment of like what the pain points are that you're feeling in your recruitment process, and then use that to see where AI can help plug in, because it sounds like chances are companies, including Glassdoor, are probably going to be able to help you on that path too.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, for recruiting professionals, I mean, there's a wide variety of AI-related tools out there already that are helping them do things like write your job descriptions with less gender or ethnic bias in them, or like find matches for candidates and things like that. I think people are going to use more of those to make their, like you use tools to do to take one part of your job, make it go away, so that you can focus on the stuff you're really good at, which is the creative work, building relationships with people, doing strategic planning, thinking long term. So I mean, my opinion is companies need to be getting ready for like finding ways throughout the workforce where the jobs themselves are going to change because of AI, but not be eliminated. I think that's a mistake to think that all your jobs are just going to be done by automation. Anybody who works close to automation and in tech will tell you there's plenty of roles for humans, and there always will be.
Got it. So we shouldn't get too optimistic yet, maybe even about a shortened work week because AI. No,
we're not going to be going to a 3-day work week, unfortunately, anytime soon.
All right. So AI, somewhat of a friend, but not the shortened work week. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Andrew, thank you again so much. This was tremendous. Again, you will get a recap of the trends from 2018, things that are coming in 2019 if you've registered for the event, and visit us at glassdoor.com/research/studies. Thanks very much.